Oh, hello everyone. Like I was telling everyone, I had this very long and fancy introduction for Oliver, and then I realized every single person on this call has received Oliver's intro email and knows Oliver very well. So, for the sake of the video and people who are not watching, Oliver Libby is one of the co-founders of Resolution Project, a member of the board of directors, and a guide, and also a facilitator of the AIC Pitch 201 session. He's also the managing partner of HL Ventures. Today, he's going to add to what you already know from your pitch. So your own experience pitching, he'll share best practices and building a better pitch. This is a great opportunity to learn from somebody who has done all of those things. So please come off mute, ask questions when it is time, and do not be afraid to even drop them in the chat if you have connectivity issues. With that, Oliver, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, good morning or afternoon or night, depending on where you are, everybody. And Michelle, thanks for the very kind introduction. This is always one of my favorite discussions of the year because the AIC is really important to me. It's something we were thinking about from the earliest days of the Resolution Project, is assuming that we had fellows that were scaling, like what could we do to continue to be relevant to the resources and skills required for the continued growth of those ventures and those fellows. So I'm glad to see all of you here and excited that you're all taking part. I will, as traditional, and I think some of you know this about me, I'm going to try and keep my kind of remarks to a bare minimum. I'll talk about the kind of 4 critical points that I share in terms of pitching and fundraising, and try and move through them pretty rapidly in order for us to save as much as possible in terms of time for questions and then answers and conversation, which I always think is most useful in these contexts anyway. So please, as Michelle mentioned, raise your hand or just jump on in during my remarks. But even more importantly, have your questions ready, because it's more exciting for me to think about how to be immediately relevant to your needs than it is for me to just drone on about generalities. That said, pitching and fundraising in general, which is the main object of most pitches at this stage, is critical to any profession or job. And no matter what you do, whether it's for your particular venture and enterprise in the narrow context of the AIC, or any job, whether you're a physician pitching for grant research, or a politician, or a business person, or a philanthropist, no matter what it is, you have to make a persuasive case for whatever you're doing, and you have to secure resources for that thing. So pitching effectively is an exceedingly important life skill, no matter what. Michelle mentioned my background. I will not harp on it, with the exception of to say that between leading the board of the Resolution Project as a co-founder and my venture capital firm and other things that I do in the space of entrepreneurship, I probably see somewhere on the order of 5,000 pitches per year, which means that I'm, verging on, close to 75,000 to 100,000 pitches in my career. And so you could say that if I know anything about anything, it's about this. So without further ado, there's just kind of 4 broad points that I think are really important to understand in terms of pitching, and particularly pitching for capital, which is what you're doing in this context. The first one of those things is understanding what you need. A lot of the mistakes people make when they're going out to pitch for anything is going out to pitch for something generic. I need capital. I'm told that at this stage, most enterprises can raise X, and so I'm going to go out and raise X. The truth is, you really want to be authentic to what you need, and have a deep understanding of what that is. And so you really need to do a good analysis of your business, because if you can't understand what your business or your venture needs, if you don't know how it runs and what it's prepared to do in the next few years. So having your financial projections and a really good understanding of your budget, your resources required in order to achieve those goals, is a critical first ingredient to having a good pitch. It is essentially, knowing yourself, right? And so knowing yourself, knowing your need is really important, which allows you to generate what's called a use of proceeds. The use of proceeds is, what are we going to spend this new resource, this new money on? That also opens the door to a few other really important parts of understanding yourself before you even pitch. First of all, the structure of your enterprise will direct you to a certain kind of fundraising and structures that you can use to take in the resources you need. So for example, if you're a for-profit, if you're a not-for-profit, if you are the type of business that can take in venture capital versus more traditional business financing versus perhaps even credit or debt of some kinds, understanding what your enterprise needs and then how it is structured will lead you kind of like a mathematical equation to how much you need to raise and in what format. And as part of this analysis is always the question, what are you prepared to give up for the resources you're trying to bring in? If you're a nonprofit, perhaps you're prepared to give up certain sponsorship rights or putting people on a stage with you or putting their logo on your website. If it's a business, you're prepared perhaps to give up either payments on debt or maybe a part of the actual enterprise itself to an investor, and you're giving up equity. But whatever it is, it's really important for you to start with a good knowledge of the enterprise that you're building, how much resource it needs, what is the right structure then that you're going to go out and raise those resources, and what are you prepared to give up in return? So that's the first module here is knowing yourself before you even have that first conversation. And it will make you a more confident and prepared pitcher if you know that cold. What is the second thing? Well, once you understand yourself, you need to know your audience. And this is a really important thing. A lot of entrepreneurs of all kinds approach every pitch from the perspective of, I know my enterprise and I know how I want to talk about it. And so that's the way I'm going to pitch, and I hope it lands. That is a terrible way to approach this. The best way to approach this is to understand that there's someone sitting across the table from you in a pitch or in the Zoom room, if the case may be. And those people are driven by factors that make them more or less likely to want to support you. And if your pitch is not well confident, also able to be inflected to match your audience, then it is much less likely to be successful. Some of you, I think Wahid, you probably heard me say this before, others have as well, but there are largely three broad types of persona that you can be sitting across from in a fundraising context. The first person is the easiest person to deal with because they're just there because it's you. And this is your friends and family. If you're fortunate enough to have friends and family that can fund you, or people who are really close to you and have been with you for a long time, and they're prepared to just say, look, Domingo, I'm happy to do this because it's you. I really don't care what it is. Here's X amount of money. That's good news because it's easy, but the bad news is it's rare and it's not something you can count on. And we're going to kind of dispense with it because those people, it doesn't require a lot of skill to get them to say yes. So what are the other two kinds of personas that you can be pitching? I like to call those people story givers and model givers. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, I use the term giving broadly. So it could be donating, it could be investing, but they're giving you resources one way or the other in exchange for something. And so one group gives on the basis of a story, the other group gives on the basis of a model. It is incredibly important to understand who you're talking to. Let me explain why. I am normally a model giver. So if you come to me and you say, oh my gosh, my venture has really helped this young lady in this place to help feed her children, and her life has been changed, and it's really an incredible story and it's very moving. There are some people, the story givers, the tear will come to their eye and they'll say, oh my God, like I really need to be a part of that story and like I need to support you. And those people are super, super valuable, and there are many of them. The model giver is going to say, okay, that's cool. Like, I'm so glad to hear that that worked out, but how are you going to do that 10,000 times? Like, what is the system? How are you going to, like, how can I as an investor make money on this? Or as a donor, how can I be sure that the impact is going to be there? Whatever it is, the model giver is going to say, don't, you can give me a couple stories because I like to have enthusiasm about this, but honestly, I'm in this to understand the enterprise that you're building, the system, the returns, the economics of it, et cetera. The story giver is going to say, don't bore me with those details. Like as long as you tell me it's going to work out, move me with the stories. Neither one is better than the other, but they're super different. And if you pitch a model to a story giver or a story to a model giver, you will not get a good response. Because they'll turn right off. And the good news is you can tell normally pretty early in a conversation to whom you are speaking. We're going to get to narrative in just a second. But so knowing your audience is a really important thing. And there's a couple of ways you can get to know your audience. The first thing is you can do research, right? So as you expand your network, which we're going to talk about in a bit, you should try and understand based on, if you've got a meeting coming up with, Joe Schmo or Jill Smith, and you can find out what they've said online about the way that they invest or donate, and they've been transparent about that. Or you can try and kind of understand from their public profile what kind of giver they're going to be. That's really important. But also in the conversation, very early in the conversation, I think you can kind of seed both an inspiring story and some kind of system information. And whichever one they lock in on, you can even see it in their face and their eyes on Zoom or across the table from you at coffee. You'll be able to tell very quickly what they've keyed in on. A story giver is going to be like, oh my God, that's an incredible story. Tell me more, like what happened to that person? Do you still talk to them? And then the model giver is going to be like, okay, so let me get this straight. So you're targeting 5,000 beneficiaries next year, up from 2,000 this year. Can you tell me more how you're going to get there? You'll understand within minutes who you're talking to. And then my recommendation is you have several versions of your narrative. This is not being inauthentic. It's just being responsive to your audience. So you should have versions of your pitch that emphasize different things, and you lock into that version of the narrative, which brings us to point number 3. So first was know yourself, know your need. Then it's know your audience and who you're talking to and what approach you're going to use. The next thing is the actual pitch, which is a combination of narrative and materials. So I think it's good to blend early in the conversation a combination of inspiration and information. And that's what I was just describing. You'll get a sense of who you're talking to if you put a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of information and see what they key in on most. But you want to have both available to you in your pitch. You also want to have a toolkit available. And the toolkit is the basic elements of any good pitch or fundraise. You need a deck. It's almost impossible to raise money these days without a deck, be it a nonprofit, for-profit, venture backable, credit backable, no matter what it is, a deck with very, very, very recognizable elements to it, which you can find anywhere online. I'm happy to share resources after this. Your deck is like the Bible of fundraising and pitching. You also, if you have a complex enterprise, you want a data room, especially important when you're for profit, because the data room will have things like contracts or examples, employment contracts, your incorporation documents. And this is true whether you're doing this in, Delaware in the United States or in Kenya or in Thailand or wherever it might be, right? So the data room is an important thing. There's usually, you can put it on Google Drive or whatever, but it's like the other research information that an investor or donor might want to have. And then you're going to have a structure. And the structure is how you would like to raise this money. Hey, it's a sponsorship for my nonprofit. Hey, it's a loan. Hey, it's an investment, and this is what I'm prepared to give up for it. But people will say to you, you want to do as much work for them as you can. So they'll say to you at the end of the conversation.
I'm in a meeting. I'll call you.
Is that a question or just a? Oh, okay. Anyway, so they'll say something like, "Well, Doris, I'm on board. I want to support you. How do I do that?" Right? What does this look like? And if you say, well, I'll get back to you on that, then you've let the fish on the hook for too long. So you need to say, oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that. I'm going to send you the documents on the investment or the grant right away. So it's, you start the narrative, you really have it locked in, inspiration and information, you have your toolkit. The last thing I'll say about narrative and materials, if you can, so if you're a brand new presenter, do whatever you need to do to give a good presentation. I always like to say the introductory level presentation will be rehearsed and it will sound rehearsed. And that's okay to a certain extent. So if you need to, for example, memorize your pitch, then do it. But the most advanced pitches are not memorized and they're not read. They're delivered as though you know them cold because you believe in the story and are authentically behind everything you're saying. There's a huge difference between me, like I'm going to give you a couple of examples, right? Someone who is reading a pitch is going to look like this, either God forbid, at coffee or on Zoom. You're going to be looking, it's going to be a presentation where you are reading the thing and it's really uncompelling. If you memorized it, oftentimes you're looking up and to the right and you're saying, again, it's very rehearsed. It's like, and the total addressable market for our business is this, or you can just tell a story. Federico, thank you so much for joining me. Look, I'm really excited about what we're doing here. Let me walk you through a few things. The first thing I want to share with you is just how big the opportunity is here. This problem is massive and natural language, right? And so the true jujitsu of pitching is well beyond just looking back at your deck or memorizing something. The people who really deeply understand what they're trying to convince someone of don't need much rehearsal or anything like that. It's coming from here and it flows, right? And so you want to get to the point where this pitch is fluid and it flows and you're just talking to someone and you're hitting all the information. You can have notes in front of you, but my notes, for example, for this conversation look like this. I'm like, here are my 4 points. And so as you can tell, I'm making eye contact with you. I know this stuff cold. This is an area I'm an expert in. If you're asking someone to back you, you better be an expert in the thing you're asking them to back you on. And that's your business or your enterprise. And so, do your best to get to that advanced level of pitching, which is a true conversation with a donor. The last thing. So we've talked about knowing your need and knowing yourself, knowing your audience, having your narrative and materials locked in. The last thing about this is the networking and relationship building side of this. This is critically important, and this work never stops. As an entrepreneur, you have consigned yourselves into the world of networking. Network is power. It is everything. By the way, it's resources, it's cash, it's access to capital. It's also access to talent and business partnerships and visibility and public relations and government and regulatory relationships. The whole thing is just meet people and convince them of what you're doing and build and build and build this village around you. And in my experience, almost nobody is useless, right? There's always something as you meet an incremental person, and this is not transactional. I'm not trying to sound like a mercenary, but you can recruit someone to be a volunteer for you. They can introduce you to someone who's going to be a funder. They can help put out a piece on social media about how inspired they are by your work. Everybody now has a part to play in your story with this enterprise if you really deeply believe in it. And so you get that network, working for you every day. And network expansion is like oxygen, right? You have to do it. Now, once you do that properly, you need a system to organize that network. And so most entrepreneurs have a CRM, a customer contact relation management system. Some of them are expensive, some of them are not. Frankly, at long last, I just use Outlook contacts and a big massive Excel spreadsheet that I've designed for myself because I wanted to customize it. But whatever it is, have a system and make sure you're keeping track of relationships. Understand within the context of this that the cadence of follow-up is part of the art of pitching. So once you've delivered an initial pitch, that's not the end of the story. Now you have to stay on someone's radar. And so I have a few things I want to share with you that are the part of my philosophy of good follow-up. The first thing is you have to have an authentic and humble understanding of where you fall in the hierarchy of the people you're talking to. You are their 100th priority. They are your first priority. They may not get back to you quickly. You can either choose to be insulted by this or just kind of recognize the fact that you're asking them for something. And so if you stay kind of in a humble place in front of them, in my case, I choose every 2 weeks as the cadence. Some people do it every week. Some people do it every month. Whatever it is right to you, every couple of weeks, I just reach out to everybody. And by the way, I reach out respectfully, but relentlessly. Okay. So every 2 weeks, if someone hasn't got back to me, I say, Abraham, I'm just checking in on the below. I'm so appreciative of your time. Please let me know your thoughts. Thank you again. And by the way, I have had this go on for months, and then out of the blue, they get back to you. And they're like, we had a problem with the business or a death in the family, or I got really sick, or I was just really swamped or whatever. But like, I'm ready to lock in again on your thing. And in my experience, holding the high ground and using that respectful, relentless follow-up generates results where just being ticked off at someone not getting back to you right away is just useless. Because remember, email is cheap, right? Like there's no reason for you to be upset that someone hasn't gotten back to you. You just stay on top of them until you get an answer. Now, the answer is often no. I've been at my work for 20 years and I get told no all the time. When we're raising a new venture capital fund, I get no roughly 9 out of 10 times, still today, still with the track record that I get. So you have to be prepared in the world of pitching for most of what you hear to be rejection. If you cannot deal with that, find something else to do, right? Like this is just part of this industry and this ecosystem of entrepreneurship, whether it be social entrepreneurship or otherwise, is rejection is a massive part of the experience. You just have to take it and you have to siphon out of it good feedback and put the rest of it to bed. It can't affect, you have to be open to learning more about your pitch and your business. And if you're getting no more often than you want to, then consider obviously upgrading what you're doing. But in general, just understand, even if you have the best idea in the history of the world, you're going to hear no more than you hear yes. And so I think that's really important. The other thing about the word no is what people mean when they say no is not now. Very rarely are people going to say, hey, Ambrose, no, and never darken my doorstep ever again. I mean, if you're respectful and appropriate about the way that you pitch, all they're saying to you is, I'm not going to do this right now. So what is your response? You can either say, fine, I never want to see you again either, or you can say, okay, well, listen, thank you so much for your time. I know now is not the right time, but let me ask you 2 questions. Number one, can I stay in touch with you from time to time to keep you updated on our work? You'd be amazed how frequently I've seen that turn into something down the line. And number two, are there a couple people that you think I should talk to? It's Keep in mind, and you've been on the other side of this for things in your life as well. It's very hard to say no to people. You think it's easy, but actually it's uncomfortable, right? Especially if you're in person or on a Zoom call and you're looking at someone. That funder is not looking forward to the conversation of saying, hey, Alice, I'm not doing this, right? And so let them off the hook a little bit by saying, that's okay. I understand you're not going to do this right now, but can I stay in touch with you? And can you think of 2 people I should meet? You'd be amazed how often those things generate results. So I think it's really important to have resilience, but also to understand that no is not just a period at the end of the sentence. Oftentimes it's a comma, right? So I think it's really, really important. Last couple of things, and then we'll turn it over to questions. The first thing is, fundraising and asking for resources is never the reason that you're doing this. You can get bogged down in it being the big part of your day as an entrepreneur. But remember, it's a little bit like going to the gas or petrol station on a road trip with your friends. It's nobody's favorite part of the trip, and it's certainly not the reason you got in the car to go somewhere, but you're not going to get far without it. And so you better get good at doing the filling station properly so that then you can go and have fun, on the road trip. That's my best analogy for fundraising. The second thing is, and the thing that I want to leave you with in terms of my comments, my grandfather was a wonderful and wise man, and he always used to say that the best leaders live on a spectrum between gratitude and confidence. Pitching is exactly the same thing. You have to find the midpoint between saying, I'm so grateful that you are here to listen to me and that you're giving me a hearing, but I'm also confident that what I'm showing you is a good opportunity. The most important feedback that I hear from people who I teach is, I just don't like asking for money. I'm really uncomfortable asking for things. I want you to completely reframe pitching in your mind. You are not begging or asking. You are presenting an opportunity in exchange for something that you will be very appreciative of, which is capital or resources, whether it comes in the form of debt, equity, grant, whatever it is. But you are not just saying, please, sir, may I have some more? You're saying, I have a thing that's worth backing. And either as a sponsor, a debt holder, or an equity holder, I'm prepared to exchange something in exchange for the value and the resources you're providing for me. And I believe in what I'm doing, and I think it would be right for you to be involved. So you're not begging, and you're not really asking. You're proposing an opportunity and a transaction. It doesn't mean that you don't have gratitude for their time, for their support. If they say yes, it's really important to feel that appreciation, but it doesn't mean that you're begging. It doesn't mean that you're just coming to the conversation prostrate, saying, please help me. You are presenting an opportunity. And if you don't believe strongly enough in your idea to get there, then think again about what you're doing, right? Because you need to feel like you're giving someone the opportunity to be part of something that you care a lot about. So that gratitude and confidence spectrum is really important. And the best pitches, you can feel both of those things. When I pitch Resolution Project or our funds or anything like that, I'm always telling people, I'm so grateful for your time. I know there's a lot of places you can put your capital and your time, but let me tell you why I think what we're doing is really important and really worthwhile. And that, just thematically, that's where you'll find success in pitching. So with that, let me turn it over to you all for questions. I hope that's been helpful. Federico.
Hello, Oliver. So first of all, thank you very much. It was a great session, especially your grandfather's anecdote. I want you to know that from now on, I'll tell everyone, Oliver's grandfather had this great saying. But my question goes in terms of the audience. You that have experience with the AIC previously, how would you categorize the AIC audience? In general, are there going to be more of the model audience, or is there still some folk that want to be sentimental, and how should we think of constructing our pitch in terms of that audience?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, Federico. So obviously there's a few different parties within the AIC funding community, but actually I tend to think of them, they're there because they care about impact, right? It's the Accelerating Impact Challenge. And so you want to put enough of the moving stories and the enthusiasm into your pitch to make sure they understand it. And obviously impact is part of what they're kind of buying into. But actually this group is going to be more on the model side. They're going to want to understand. They're like, great, I'm really glad. I'm like, we need to get to the baseline of impact and why you're doing this and your motivation and that's great. We want to know that. But as soon as you're done with that, like get into the enterprise because you're asking for acceleration. And acceleration, it's like, well, what am I accelerating? What's the system? If I give you capital, what are you going to do with it to make more and more of that impact? So it's a hybrid group to be sure, Federico. But I think if you're picking where to spend your time, even in your, if you all will remember this from your resolution project fellowship finals, but we always say, you have 5 minutes to pitch. Don't use more than 1 minute of it on the problem statement. Like so many pitches in impact spend 4.5 minutes on like, there are starving people. Okay, we know that, right? Like it's a terrible thing. And you can just Google starving people and like you don't need to spend 4.5 minutes of your time. Spend a half a minute of your time on the problem and then the entire rest of it on like what are you doing about it? How is it going to be scalable? How is it going to work? I think that for the AIC is that guessing as to the direction, that would be the direction I would take.
Thank you.
And by the way, like one of the best strategies I have for that, Federico, is what I call the sandwich. So you have a great moving story at the front. You spend all of your time on the systems, the infrastructure, the acceleration, what you're doing, and then you close with an inspiring story as well. You're supposed to generate enthusiasm and inspiration, right? But when I say the inspiration and information, right? The information is most of your time, and then your 2 slices of bread on either side of it are inspiration. Other questions? I saw a couple more hands.
Hello, Oliver.
Hey,
thank you for that presentation. It was very enlightening, and it was great because I'm here because of an invitation of Federico. So I didn't plan to go here, so it's great to hear from you. And I have a question, and is that I have some experience like having explorative meetings with different people, institutions, enterprises, and most of the times, and maybe due to the circumstances here in Venezuela, which is difficult to give money and to invest in our NGO, most of the times I have to go lower with the things that I'm asking for, and instead of saying no, what I have done is adapt and be aware that maybe most of the times they won't give us money. My question is, do you recommend to lower our expectations, taking into consideration the circumstances, and maybe ask for other benefits, or to stay strong with the benefits that you are looking for, which in this NGO mainly is financial sustainability?
It's a very complicated question, Domingo. And by the way, for you and Federico, my grandfather that I mentioned was born in Caracas and is, I think, Venezuela's only Nobel laureate. So his name is Baruch Ben-Asiraf. He passed away about 10 years ago. But anyway, Venezuela is very special to me. So also super, super, super complicated. I still am guide to one of the original Resolution Fellows who's in Venezuela. And it's a really challenging situation. So a couple things. If you need cash, you have to ask for cash. The question is how much and what else also, right? And so you can't be just blind to the situation, and the situation in Venezuela is very, very challenging, both politically, of course, and also economically, right? And so you have to put the enterprise in a place to survive while this works out. And so I think it's kind of like a combination of the things you mentioned. You can't just not ask for anything, right? Like there's still, even in the most challenging times in the middle of world wars and things like that, economic activity still continues. There are still grants and loans and equity investments. They're just usually harder to get and smaller. And maybe people try and say, look, I can do a little bit here, but I can also help you make introductions. And so you're going to need to be more resilient than the average entrepreneur, which is the sad truth of the situation in Venezuela and other countries as well. But it doesn't mean that you don't ask for anything. It means that you do, like, figure out what the lifeboat, kind of situation is for some period of time, and also come prepared so that your ask is not just a financial ask, right? It's like, we need this amount of financing. And in lieu of that, maybe there's other things you can do to help us defray our costs. Is there volunteering work you can do to help us as a CFO? Is there, are there materials that you can send to us that aren't money, but that would be helpful that we don't have to then buy? So you got to get creative in that sense. So I think, I think you're thinking about the right way, which is, it's not no ask, it's creative ask, and it's stretching how far the resources will get you until there's more clarity on the situation. And by the way, we've been dealing with that in the venture capital space now for a couple of years, even in the US. I mean, venture capital, when, dried up, I mean, it's like 1/10 of what it was 2 years ago. And so all the startups, we're kind of stretching them through this process. Abraham.
Great. Thanks so much, Oliver. It was a really, really engaging session. Just loved listening to you. I guess I would have granted you funding if you were pitching to me or something. But I think my question is really trying to understand the thin line between confidence and arrogance during a pitch session. And I wondered if you could link that to the point where you look at accepting your vulnerability during a pitch. So
Yeah.
if a funder was pointing out to you gaps in your pitch and you felt you could justify why you are making a particular claim, can that sometimes also be interpreted as, okay, they're confident about what they're saying, and that means it works? Or could that be seen as, oh, he's arrogant, he doesn't want to accept suggestions? Sometimes I get confused about understanding where you are confident and where you just become arrogant, and how all of that plays out in the vulnerability discussion.
Again, a very sophisticated question, Abraham. And you're right to ask it, because in essence, it's very hard to tell the difference. In my experience, though, there's kind of 3 broad reasons why someone might be pushing back in a presentation. They've either decided they don't want to do anything to help you and they're just poking holes, in which case it doesn't really matter what you do. Or they have identified a real flaw in your reasoning or your business, and you need to be open to that and talk about it, right? And talk about how you're thinking about it. Or they have misunderstood something and you need to gently correct them. In all cases, though, your response, I think, is the same, which is, it is completely acceptable to defend your ground, but always think about it as from a position of openness and respect for the question, right? So what happened, I'll just play act it with you for a minute here. If someone said to me with Resolution Project, for example, Oliver, you're only giving out maybe 70 resolution fellowships a year, you're never going to change the world that way. 2 reactions. Yeah, we just don't agree with that. Like, you don't understand what we're doing here. It's really important. Like, did you read the presentation? Like, I don't even understand how you could say that. Like, are you just not understanding what we're doing here? Or, it's a really important question, and we think about this all the time. But if you'll allow me, 70 resolution fellows is just the tip of the iceberg, because what you really are thinking about is this accumulating group of hundreds upon hundreds of entrepreneurs, each of whom employs, over the group of them, thousands of people, impacts millions of lives, raises billions of dollars, and thereby we aggregate over time and with scale a global impact. But by the way, you're right, we would love to do more. And one of the blocks to us doing more is having the resources to expand the program, right? I'm being a little bit overly caricatured here, but the difference between those responses is the difference between someone being like, all right, they're listening to me, they get it, they understood my concern, they have a response, that's great, they have a degree of confidence, but they're not going to be impossible to work with, right? Whereas the first, you're dead, right? Like, there's no way to go forward from that. And so always in a pitch, like, even if you feel like, how could you ask me such a stupid question? I just told you this. you just have to like, you're an actor, right? And you're putting forward a performance, and that performance, you have a persona that you inhabit, and you just have to think to yourself like, look, I live and breathe this stuff, and this person's had 22 minutes with me. It's okay if they didn't hear everything I said. Let me just respectfully respond, right? And it's also totally fine to say, that's a real flaw in our business. And one of the things we're going to work on in the next year is an answer to that flaw. We have some ideas. We love your help. You sound like you're really thoughtful about this. Like, we don't have all the answers here. You can also live in that space as well, and that's okay. But you don't want to do too much of that, because you don't want to give the investors the impression that you don't know what you're doing, right? So, but for certain select things where there's clearly more work to do, you can absolutely say, we know that's a potential risk here, and we're working on it in the following ways, and we would love to have your thought partnership in solving this in the next year as well, because investors don't usually want to be thought of as just like a walking checkbook, right? And so it's a lot of it is a very vibe oriented thing, Abraham, but it's really important to kind of be able to receive that and then put back forward both a defense of your position, but from a position of like hearing and understanding why the concern exists.
Thanks, Oliver. Good.
Yeah. Other questions? I think I saw Anj maybe unmute there for a second.
I just wanted to ask a question. Hi, Oliver. It is great to hear from you, and lovely presentation. Very interesting topic. So I am pitching for a nonprofit, something I want to do. So first question from my side is like, out of this, the audience who are going to looking forward to help us, how much of the percentage would be from the nonprofit background, like at least interested for supporting or nonprofit? That's my first question. Second thing is, we have done without a single funding for 2 years, and we have made a significant progress. Yes, we have investment. That's our time and the time that we spend. Also, we spend our own money. So we are also concerned that maybe we will have heard a question that, as you already done 2 years without any funding, why you are looking funding? Why don't you do the rest of the life with voluntary? Second thing is, we also expanding significantly our work as a right now we're working on the youth and the climate startups, helping with the pro bono services, but we also want to expand our footprints in research, ESG consulting, as well as public advocacy. That is something new. Would it be wise to ask money for those new areas which we didn't start properly yet, or we will ask that 2 years we have done it, we make a proof of concept, this number of impacts have been done, people accepted us, this is our formula. If we want to continue for a linear time, we need financial support. That's something we can we are thinking about to approach. So what is your suggestion for us?
Yeah, so there are a lot of questions in there. I think so number one, I don't know the exact mix of the EIC funders this year. Michelle, you may have better information, but certainly they're used to funding both grants and investments. And a goodly number of them are from the nonprofit sector, large foundations and that kind of thing. So I don't think you, I want to emphasize for everybody here, the advice that I've given today is equally useful for nonprofits, for-profits, and also for grants, credit, or equity financing, right? The pitch is still the same thing. And actually, when I raise money for Resolution, which is a nonprofit, as you all know, like I think of it as raising an investment, right? It happens to be an investment with 100% cash loss, but other benefits, right? But it's still an investment. And I think about it that way. You're still buying into a model, a storyline, et cetera. Yeah. So Michelle, you just put in, so I mean, for example, the Roddenberry Foundation, I just spoke to their board last week. They're a nonprofit. They back both for-profits and nonprofits, Wahid. So I think you can be confident in, just your structure being acceptable. In terms of look, I think bootstrapping is great, but like any investor knows, if you're going to accelerate and grow faster, you can't rely, unless you happen to be a billionaire, like you're not going to rely on the management team to just continue to bootstrap if you're going to get scale. I mean, it's the difference between what we call a lifestyle business or an investable business. Lifestyle business, like, okay, you funded it out of pocket. It's, Uncle Joe's money and, you and your friends and whatever, like, but you're not at the AIC because you're trying to do that. And so I don't think you're going to get pushback on that. In fact, I think you'll get like, wow, it's great that you've been able to bootstrap it this far, but like, we get why you're looking for external funding. So that's fine. And then with respect to, I mean, it was a longer part of your question, but I think you when you pitch, you want to, as much as possible, pitch something that has some data behind it, so that they know, the definition of the AIC specifically is follow-on funding. So, if you've got new things you're going to do, you can always kind of tease those things, but I think you really want to center your pitch around like the thing is working that you now want to accelerate, right? And so the emphasis should be on that, and you can always tease away like, hey, by the way, if this really works well, we can do this, that, and the other thing as well, or we have these other activities that are helpful. But like the core thing is, to the greatest extent possible, the core thing that you're pitching should be something where you're pretty sure it's working, at least to a certain extent.
Thank you so much. This is helpful.
You got it. I saw Hardik, you unmuted?
Yes. Hi, Oliver. It's great to see you again. And thank you very much. The session's been fantastic. I just have one question more from a specific AIC standpoint, since you have experience with having not just coached, but also probably seen a lot of the pitches that people in the cohorts before us would have made. Do you have any suggestions for us from the perspective that what are funders looking for specifically? And again, I agree that you've mentioned that it's certain times it's a grant, it's an investment, and we should differentiate based on the kind of people that would be potentially on the panel to fund us. But where I'm coming from is that I did a little bit of research, and I believe that a little bit of the funding has been very heavy from an Africa perspective, from previous versions of the AIC. And I had Sagar, who was also a classmate of mine and fellow Resolution Project, who was there last year. And he also pointed out that somewhere he was not able to meet the expectations of what the funders were looking for. And he wasn't exactly even able to figure out what it is that they were looking for. So do you have any broad guidance from a maybe country point of view, or is it something that applies to everybody and it's more to do with your venture and not really with how you're pitching or what you're asking for?
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, my understanding is that, and looking at the list of folks who are on the AIC, certainly Roddenberry, who I know well, is, a global funder. So I think, making the case authentically from your geography should be, it shouldn't be that restrictive. In terms of what funders are looking for, I think it always depends, right? But the broad overview of what any funder of any kind is looking for is a combination of what I would call like team, product, and market, right? And the team, right? Is the team capable of executing this? Are you mentorable and coachable? Do you have a good plan? Are you, do you seem like someone who's got the ability to lead this thing? Do you have the right infrastructure in place, et cetera, et cetera? So all the kind of the team, people related questions, what's your reason for doing this, motivation, et cetera, et cetera. Product is, it can be an actual product like a technology or a piece of software, or it can be a model of service, right? So a product could be a curriculum, or it could be a service model. But whatever the product is it dialed in? Like, what are the unit economics? Does it make sense? And again, this is as true for a nonprofit as it is for a for-profit, but the product of the Resolution Project, if you wish, if you want to think of it this way, is the fellowship and the grants that we give. Do you understand, how to do that really well? Is it scalable? Does it work? What are the mechanics of it? Are you delivering it successfully so far, et cetera, et cetera? And finally, the market, why are you doing this? Is it a big enough market? Is there enough need? Is there enough potential for either the grant or the investment to make sense? Underlying all those things is as much data as possible, right? The more clear the picture that you're painting can be, and clarity is data, the better. And then, you're going to want a combination. Most of the AIC funders are interested in impact, of course, right? Even if they're, interested in how you're going to generate the impacts, you need to have a really good impact story, and a scalability story, because again, you wouldn't be within the AIC, cohort if you weren't thinking of scaling. And so you've got to make the case that you have the right team, the right product, the right market, that you're going to have a great impact, and that you are able to, using the resources that you may raise from these people, scale this. Those are kind of the broad overview of things. I realize that may be a little bit basic, but those are the kind of the beats to hit, so to speak.
No, perfect. This is also very helpful. So thank you very much.
You got it. Isma, I think you had your hand up before.
Yes. Thanks, Oliver. So it was very nice presentation, and nice to see you after, I don't know, a lot of years. Yeah. I have a question on the budget. So I've seen like we've not been talking about any limit, like the way the resolution does it, where they tell you can't exceed maybe $6,000. So I'm seeing like here, there haven't been any information on the limit of how big our budget can be. So my question is, what happens if my budget like is too big for any of the funders? Can two of them partner to fund a project like the same team? Like, for example, the livelihood and the Roddenberry Foundation are merging, maybe to say, okay, let's fund this this venture, and they're doing it as a team. In case the budget happens to be bigger than any of the what any one of the funders can do, and then also like how big is too big? Like if we compare to the previous competitors in this thingy, in this funding. I don't know if I'm clear, but yeah.
No, I get the question. I get the question. So Michelle, I'm going to turn it over to you in a second to talk a little bit more about the actual mechanics of the presentation and how the funding flows, but a couple of things on my end. First of all, you always want to think about presenting a budget. Normally one funder doesn't take care of the whole thing, right? And so if I'm just going to throw out crazy numbers because for fun, right? Like, let's say that you're trying to raise $10 million. Most investors aren't going to be like, I love this idea, here's $10 million, right? And so they're going to write a part of that, and or it could be $100,000, $1, it doesn't matter, right? The quantum doesn't matter. Most investors are going to do a fraction of your need. And so two things need to be true. Number one, there needs to be enough potential capital you can raise that you can get there for you. Funder, they need to believe that if they're giving you $2 of the $10 that you need, that you have a reasonable chance of getting the other 8, or you can do something useful with the 2 that they're going to give you. So Michelle, over to you for AIC mechanics specifically, but I would think about it as like, get as much as you can from this group. And then it's also a pretty impressive group to then go to other funders and say, hey, we've gotten, a bite of 30% of our total budget. Can we find the rest? What you don't want is to be in a situation where you're raising 2% of your total budget from these guys, because then it doesn't really make a difference. So Michelle, thoughts on this?
Yeah, actually, to help see things along, because I want to be mindful of your time. Agoli, do you want to jump on and ask your question? Sorry, and then I can, at the end of the call, we can cover Isa's question. That'll be my
Okay.
time with my message.
Okay, I'll just jump in. Oliver, I think my question is, are there any tips you could share for reading the room when you are pitching, to know if funders are kind of interested in what you're saying, and if you have to change format or approach to what you're saying, or to know when you have to stop talking? Are there some tips you could share for how someone could read the room during a pitch?
Yeah. You have to be an active room reader and listener when you're pitching, but you somehow have to find in yourself not to be distracted by it. So most funders, I'll give you an example. Like when I'm hearing a pitch, I am usually stony faced, right? Like and it's because I'm concentrating and I don't want to look enthusiastic and then say no or mislead people. And so normally when I'm hearing a pitch, I'm just sitting there like, Yeah, like this. Don't let that, don't be like, hey, like, where's the energy in the room, right? You're not doing stand-up comedy, you're pitching. And so, if you're not getting a lot back from the audience, don't worry about it. The times at which you actually want to change what you're doing actually goes back to what I was talking about with the model and story givers. If you can see part of the way you're pitching is just not working for people, right? Like, so if you're sitting across from someone who's clearly a model giver and you're really belaboring, like, really moving stories about your model and what it's done for 2 or 3 people, and they're like, yeah, cool, I'm really glad to hear that, but like, I got to understand more about your business. If you're like, don't you care about what happened with the stories I'm telling you? Like, wrong move, right? And so you have to be responsive to the feedback you're getting if there's anything you could do about it in the pitch. So it's a little bit of a combination of like, you got to read the room, and there have to be pathways within your narrative that you can kind of trigger to respond to what you're getting from the room, but you can't let it distract you or deflate you. And you cannot expect investors to like, I mean, some of them are going to be like nodding the whole time, like, yeah, preach, right? But like, you can't expect that. You should love it if it happens and don't worry about it if it doesn't, and just do your thing. So, it's a tough, line to draw here, but you have to kind of be able to do both things at once.
Great, thanks, Oliver.
For sure. Awesome. Any other questions before we wrap up here? Okay, Michelle, over to you.
Thank you, and everybody stay on because I will talk about the mechanics of AIC. That doesn't need to be recorded. Thank you so much, Oliver. I learned a lot actually, so this has been very helpful. I always like to hear your presentations. So thank you so much again for joining us this morning. This is being recorded, so it will go up and we'll share it out
soon. If you have additional questions you want to ask Oliver, I am a person who thinks of things while I'm walking. Send them over to me, and I can send them over for you.
Michelle, your audio is coming in and out. I don't know if that's just me.
It might be the room I'm in. Okay. Let's take my headphones out.
Well, I will leave you all then, and Michelle will take it from here, but I just want to say thank you for your attention as always. I appreciate it. It's always fun to be able to talk with Resolution Fellows. I wish you all the best of luck on the AIC. It's really exciting. And I look forward to, seeing and hearing about these pitches. So go get them. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Oliver. Thanks so much.